Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and we've got a boatload of stuff to discuss, lots of news, but just a ton of things flying around the league lately. But hope everyone has been doing well and staying safe. I know that Mother's Day is right around the corner. I still have to figure out something for my mom. I thought it was on May 19th, but my stepdad, he told me it's on May 9th, so I am glad he called and mentioned that because I need to get going on getting my mom something for her special day. But I've found that over the years, it's more so important to get a thoughtful gift rather than just paying a bunch of money for something. So I'll get my thinking cap out and put it on, see what I can come up with. But anyways, ladies and gents, let's dive into this show today. And I'll first get into some news flying around the league and just any and all updates from around the MLB world and even a little recap from the games of the night before. I'll then discuss and get into dissecting this Padres and Dodgers rivalry and what it will entail this whole year, some things to watch, other series they'll have throughout the year, and so on and so forth, everything in between about it. And then later, I'll get into whether or not the Cubs should go all in this year and try to build one last winning team, or should they scratch that and rebuild starting this offseason. And then, as always, make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into which teams that are struggling now that will turn it around by the end of the year. So again, a jam-packed show, a lot of things coming on and going around the league. And one of the most pertinent things I would say that's coming around the league is this news or kind of rumor, if you will, that's floating around about Max Scherzer and how he could be the next big name that's on the move from the Nationals. So right now, Scherzer, again, he's in his last year of his contract with the Nationals. He'll be a free agent at the end of the year. He has a no-trade clause in his contract, so he could really actually dictate at one point or another wherever he wants to go. And it kind of makes me wonder, okay, what are they going to do? Is he going to ask for getting out of his contract by the trade deadline? Is he going to try and demand a trade and get things reworded? Who knows? But at the end of the day, I could see him maybe wanting to fight to get on a team that's going to be a championship contender if the Nationals aren't a championship contender team by July 30th, which is the trade deadline this year. But if they're a contender, I don't see why he would leave. I really don't. You know, he's been a huge part to this Nationals team. He's been, quite frankly, I think, one of the main pieces to all of their success over the last few years. And I think that if he does leave, it's going to be an uphill battle for the Nationals, right? Steven Strasburg, in all honesty, although he is a very good pitcher, I think that he's slowly kind of winding down. I think he's slowly getting towards the tail end of his career, and slowly but surely he will find himself out of baseball eventually, as sad as it sounds. But if Scherzer goes, that's just going to accelerate the process, I think. I think if Scherzer goes, that's going to be kind of the beginning to the end of the Nationals. And it would be really unfortunate if that happened by July, because they go out and get a guy like Josh Bell, they go out and get a guy like Brad Hand to come out of the bullpen for them, they go out and get a guy like Kyle Schwarber, and then all of a sudden they're going to just get rid of Scherzer and they're going to have to start from scratch all over again. And there have been some teams mentioned as possible destinations for this former Cy Young winner, some of them being the Angels, the Athletics, Cardinals, Giants, and Yankees. They're all names that have been very interested in him, and quite frankly, some of those teams, maybe more so than others, would be actually really good fits for him. I think that the Athletics would probably be, and I hate to say this, but they're probably going to be the least likely team to actually snag him, and mainly because I just don't think that they've got enough money, to afford him long term. So if they do get him, it would probably be for maybe a late season push into the playoffs, maybe on a one-year deal. But outside of that, again, I don't really see any point of them going after and getting a player like Scherzer. I think that kind of goes against their entire makeup and idea and what this team is all about small payroll, trying to build winning teams within the organization. I feel like it would kind of go against that a little bit. So I don't think the Athletics would be a good fit. The Angels, though, would be very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. right? They're right now, they're the worst pitching team in baseball. They have the MLB high in ERA at a 5.01 clip. So adding some pitching to their rotation is not going to hurt at all. I will say, though, again, they have a lot of guys on a lot of different contracts for a lot of different money. I think if they wanted to make a last season push or a late season push and maybe kind of a last-minute run into the playoffs, I could then maybe see them getting Scherzer. And no matter what, if he does wind up in L.A., he would be an immediate impact. There is no question about that, right? I mean, you go back to 2017 when Justin Verlander was traded to the Astros, and you saw kind of the quick turnaround that had. Immediately, he was a huge impact, and all of a sudden, they're going to a World Series. Now, I know that there was, again, a lot of things that went on exteriorly to that, but at the same time, Max Scherzer would be a huge, huge, huge get for the Angels. But the Cardinals and the Yankees, I think, would be two of the more legitimate and I think logical teams to go after because, let's face it, right, the Cardinals, I think they're trying to make a push for a championship. I don't know if they have the money to pay him just because, again, they have a lot of money tied up with Arenado, and they're having to deal with him and Goldschmidt. They've already gone over their budget that they set out for themselves, so I don't think Scherzer would wind up there. I think personnel-wise he would definitely fit, but I don't think contract-wise he does. But the Yankees, on the other hand, are a team that I think would really, benefit greatly from having somebody like Scherzer because, let's face it, they don't have a great, their rotation's okay. It has not been off to a great start. They went after some guys that had a lot of injury problems and a lot of injury history in previous years, but they still have been struggling. They still have not been very good so far. And so I think that going and getting a guy like Scherzer, that could, re-wake up or wake back up the Yankees a little bit and really kind of get them going once again. And they have been hit with injuries hard. I will admit that. They've been hit pretty hard with injuries. So there's only so much that you can kind of do. But I think the Yankees would definitely make more sense than the Cardinals, definitely more sense than the Athletics because the Yankees could afford his contract. And then finally, the most interesting, I think, would be the Giants. They've got 4 or 5 guys that are going to have their contracts up at the end of this year. As a result, they're going to have a lot of room to pay guys. So I could see them going after Scherzer. Maybe they go after a shortstop and pay a lot of money for both of them and try and build kind of this powerful contending team, if you will, because the Giants right now are hanging right there, and I'll get into it in a little bit here as I go through a recap from yesterday's games and kind of get into the standings and whatnot. They're right there in the thickets of the NL West. I don't know if they're necessarily going to challenge the Padres or the Dodgers at all, but I could definitely see them being a wild card team. Having a guy like Scherzer, though, and then they go out and get another piece in the offseason, all of a sudden that just changes everything. All of a sudden it is a completely different ballgame. So I think that the Giants and the Yankees would be the most sensible, followed by the Angels, and then probably the Cardinals and the Athletics. That's how I would rank it. But all in all, if this were to go down, the Nationals would really be starting from square one. They would really be starting from square one. So getting into my next story that I want to go over, and quite frankly, it involves a team that's been off to they were off to a terrible start, but recently they have turned things completely around. They have completely flipped the switch, and all of a sudden they find themselves being one of the best teams in the AL, and that's the Athletics. After starting the year 1-7, they have rattled off 11 straight wins. They most recently picked up a very bizarre win. Again, recording this on April 22nd, so this game was from April 21st, and it was a huge extra inning game over the Twins. Twins actually, I think, gave them the game. I really do. Situation was this. They had 2 outs, bases loaded. It was the bottom half of the inning. The Twins were up 2. They were up 12-10, and the Athletics are batting. Little dribbler over to the second baseman. He bobbles it. A run scores. All of a sudden, it's 12-11. Bases are still loaded. You still have 2 outs. Ground ball over to Luis Arraez. Simple ground ball. Very, very simple. And he absolutely just sails this throw right over the first baseman's head. So the runner from third already was scoring. So that's now 12-12. And then Andrews comes around from second and scores. And now it's 13-12 and they win. Talk about bizarre, but talk about really sad if you're the Twins and you just literally gave the game away. But here are some interesting stats about the Athletics to kind of give you a perspective on how they started and then how they've been since then. Since their first 8 games, right, or in their first 8 games, they were outscored 59-19. Now on their 11-game winning streak, they're outscoring opponents 71-33. So talk about a flip. Talk about a major, major, major flip around. I mean, you don't really see that much. You really don't. And the A's are also, very fun fact, the first team to win 11 straight games after an 0-6 start at any point of the season. So after starting really, really poorly, they were able to rattle off 11 straight games, and it all happened in the same month. That's what's even more impressive, is they were literally able to turn around a terrible start into a really solid kind of second half of the month, if you will, of this first part, or the second half of the first month of the season. And it's a good sign moving forward that this athletics team can get themselves out of situations, out of jams, out of binds like that, and still find ways to win. And again, with not necessarily the most talented team. They've got talent, but it's not the most talented team. And Bob Melvin, their manager, has discussed how there's this kind of never-die mentality on the team and how they never seem to back down, they never seem to shy away from everything, and they're able to grind out wins game after game after game. And it really speaks volume to, I think, also the chemistry and just how this team has been built around, other players, but also just kind of this idea of building within the organization and bringing guys up. And the A's are just a few percentage points behind the Red Sox right now for the best record in the AL. And I think that this is going to be a very interesting team moving forward because, again, they don't necessarily have the George Springers and the Aaron Judges of the world. They've got guys that are good players like Matt Olson and Matt Chapman when they're performing well, and they've got good pitching. They've got other pieces that kind of make them a much more well-rounded and a little bit more balanced team, and I think that is why they have such success against other really good teams because they've just been a well-built team, and they're also a well-managed team as well. But, folks, I'm going to now wrap up this segment with a couple recaps from the games of April 21st. I'll run through the recaps, give some highlights, some scores, and then also just give a little update in the standings as to where everyone is standing. So, as always, I always start with my Brewers. They actually completed a 3-game sweep of the Padres, and they got a huge win on Wednesday, 4-2 over San Diego. A really, really big top 6 inning for the Brewers. That was kind of the deciding factor. I mean, the Padres were winning 2-1 going into the 5th, and then Milwaukee exploded for 3 in the top of the 6th, and that was pretty much it. And then getting into the Giants and Phillies game, Phillies winning in the bottom of the 9th. Andrew Knapp walked off with a single, beat the Giants 6-5. Phillies are now 9-9. Giants are 11-7 though. They're having a really, really good year. And honestly, the Giants, and this is something to pay attention to, looking at the box score, Phillies started off hot with 3 runs in the bottom of the 2nd, and then San Francisco answered with 1 in the 5th. Phillies answered with 1 in the 6th, but then a 4-run spot in the top of the 7th inning for the Giants, and that's something to pay attention to, that late inning scoring, and that's going to come up really, really big against teams like the Dodgers that are really good at scoring late in the game. So hats off to the Giants, but more so hats off to the Phillies for grinding one out and winning in the bottom 9th of the inning. The next game, Marlins and Orioles. Marlins winning 3-0 over the O's. Jesus Aguilar had a 2-run double. Trevor Rogers, he struck out 8 players. So a really good outing on the mound for Rogers, now moving to 2-1 on the year with a 1.6 ERA. So things might be on the up and up for the Marlins, but again, very early on in the season. We'll see how a full season goes for them. They're 8-9. Orioles are 8-10 after a pretty solid start by the O's. They've kind of fizzled out a little bit, but we'll have to see how the rest of this year goes. And then a little doubleheader action with the Pirates and the Tigers. Game 1 went to the Pirates 3-2, and then the following game the Tigers won 5-2. Pirates are right there at 8-10 though. I mean, they're not that bad through the first 18, 20 games. That's what's kind of impressive. In the second game, Jonathan Scoop, he had a solo home run, 3 runs scored in the bottom of the 5th for Detroit, and that was really kind of the main difference there, and that's kind of what pushed them over the edge, because after that, both teams scored 1 run, but that was it. That was kind of the difference, because it was 1-1 going into the 5th. They scored those 3 runs. Both teams scored 1 more run in the 6th, each apiece, and that's pretty much all she wrote from there. So getting into the next game now, Astros and Rockies. Rockies winning 6-3. Rockies are really struggling. I mean, they're really struggling. They're 6-12 right now. Trevor Story did have a 2-run double. But speaking of Trevor Story, I am a little bit concerned about what's going to happen with him moving forward with this Rockies team. Are they going to be able to keep him around? Are they going to lose him in free agency? Quite frankly, I think it is kind of leaning towards losing him in free agency, especially if they can't turn around that 6-12 record. If they can, then maybe he sticks around. I don't know if he'll necessarily want to stay for a long-term deal. I don't see him being there for the next 10 years. I don't see him being there for the next 5 years. Maybe for 2 or 3 more years, but that is it. I think after that, he's going to be gone like the wind, and he's not going to want anything to do with the Rockies. And quite frankly, I don't blame him. I mean, this is a team that has had a lot of talent over the years. They just can't do anything with it. They really can't. I've never seen I've seen other teams in other professional sports, but in terms of baseball, they've just had so many talented players over the years. Guys like DJ LeMahieu, Nolan Arenado, Charlie Blackmon, Trevor Story, Troy Tulowitzki. I mean, I'm rattling off guys that were multiple-time All-Stars and were really successful at the major league level, and they can't do anything with them. So it kind of makes you wonder, okay, is it a management thing? Is it a coaching thing? Is it just a performance thing? I mean, what is it? So I think Story's going to be gone before we know it. Next game, Like I mentioned, the 13-12 win that the Athletics had over the Twins, final in 10 innings. Minnesota put on 2 runs in the top of the 10th. Actually, the scoring was very impressive throughout the game. Oakland scored 3 runs in the bottom of the second. They scored 4 runs in the bottom of the third. They scored 2 in the bottom of the sixth, and then 3 in the bottom of the 10th. While Minnesota scored 3 in the top of the third, scored 3 in the top of the fifth, 3 in the top of the sixth, and then 2 in the top of the 10th. So multiple runs scored throughout each and every single one of those top half of those innings for the most part. The only real scoreless innings were the 4th, 7th, and 8th innings. But in total, 35 hits for both teams, 31 hits for both teams, 18 for Minnesota, 13 for Oakland. It's a pretty solid outing if you ask me. Now, both teams had 2 errors, and the Minnesota errors came at the worst possible time. But again, a huge win for the A's as they moved to 12-7, and the Twins are struggling, 6-12 right now. So they really need to turn things around and figure it out. But in the next game, Nationals, Cardinals, simple one. Nats winning 1-0. Max Scherzer actually had an incredible outing, got the win, 1-1 on the year with a 1.8 ERA. And then getting into the Rangers and Angels, Rangers won 7-4, and the Rangers are only a game back of being 500. They put up a 4-run spot in the top of the 8th and 2-run spot in the top of the 9th. That was kind of the difference there. And the Angels are 9-7, though. I mean, this AL West is actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'm kind of impressed by that, but I'll get into the standings here in a minute. D-backs and Reds. D-backs won 5-4. Reds now are 9-7, while the D-backs are 7-12 or 7-10. So a solid win by the D-backs, but the Reds, after starting off really hot, they kind of fizzled out a little bit. Just a little bit, though, just a little bit. And then getting into the Braves and Yankees game, Braves win 4-1 over the Yankees. The Yankees continue to struggle. I mean, they are really bad. I don't know what's going on in New York. I'm sure they'll figure it out, and I'm going to touch on it later on, but I don't really know what in the world is going on in New York. I really don't. I am completely and utterly confused by that, and I definitely think that they need to maybe figure it out sooner rather than later. And then getting into the next game, Blue Jays and Red Sox. Blue Jays winning 6-3 over the Sox. Now, the Sox were one of the worst teams to start, I have to admit. They were terrible. But all of a sudden, it's like a switch has been flipped, and they are a brand new team. Cubs, Mets next game. Cubs completely running away with this one, 16-4. 16-4. They put up 7 runs in the bottom of the 4th, 3 in the bottom of the 5th, and 6 in the bottom of the 6th. That's impressive. That is really impressive. 16 runs on 13 hits for them. Mets also had 4 errors as a whole, so again, not a very good outing defensively for the Mets, and they have mentioned how much of a struggle that is. I mean, Steve Cohen has been public about that. Guys on the team have been public about that, how this team is great offensively, but defensively they're terrible. And then the last game of the evening, because the White Sox and Indians were postponed, Rays and Royals. Royals winning 9-8 over the Rays. The Royals are 10-7. All of a sudden, Kansas City has got themselves really in a nice spot in the standings right now. I'll get into the standings actually right now and kind of just discuss what's been going on. Right now in the NL Central, the Brewers are leading the pack. They're 11-7, followed by the Reds, who are 1.5 games behind them. And then the NL East, the Mets are just a half a game ahead of the Phillies, but that division looks all sorts of a mess, right? I mean, they've had teams that have had cancellations, they've had teams that have postponements, so on and so forth, and so the records are kind of all over the place. And actually, the Mets are the only team in the NL East with a winning record. Everybody else has a 500 record or below, but most of these teams are either a game or 2 under 500, so they're all right there with each other. And then getting into the NL West, this is actually a really tight race atop the leaderboard. Dodgers are 14-4. Giants are 11-7. Padres are 10-10. So that's 1, 2, and 3 right there. And then getting into the AL East, Red Sox, again, right off to after a terrible start, pick things up, turn things around. They are playing much better as of late. Red Sox are 12-7, while the Rays are 10-9. They're 2 games behind the Red Sox. So they're going to be nipping at the Red Sox heels, I think. And then the Blue Jays are 8-10. I know they've kind of had some injuries, problems along the way. And then the Yankees are 6-11. They are awful. They are really, really bad. But in the AL Central, and this is where I get into the point of the Kansas City Royals, 10-7, first place in the division. That is, again, another sight to see. I know going into this year I was kind of high up on the Royals, but I was also unsure if it would actually work. But I'm glad it's panning out for them, because they are a team that have really, I think, come a long way after their incredible run in the middle of the 2010s. So maybe they'll have a similar kind of outcome here in the middle of the 2020s the next couple seasons. And then finally, the AL West. Oakland out ahead, 12-7, followed by the Mariners, who are 11-7, and the Angels that are 9-7. So a very tight race there atop the leaderboard in the AL West, which is an exciting thing to see, quite frankly. I am really excited to see how the Mariners do the rest of the year. I actually put down a little bet the other day on the Mariners, and I wound up winning. I won $10 or $20 or something on the Mariners, so I don't have an AL team, so maybe that'll be the start of me rooting for the Mariners, but nonetheless, a really good day of baseball on April 21st. But folks, that's going to do it for us in our first segment. Don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'll give my thoughts and a breakdown of the Padres and the Dodgers rivalry that has started in the MLB, and what my thoughts are of the newfound West rivalry. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I got right into some of the news flying around the league, but also a little recap from the games from the night before. But make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into discussing which teams that have been off to slow starts are going to eventually turn things around and bounce right back. I want to now get into this Padres and Dodgers rivalry and give a little overview of what has been going on, but also an outlook into the future of this rivalry and what it could mean for baseball and for the NL West. So as we all know, we already saw kind of a preview into what this rivalry is going to be like. The first series, it kind of went as I think everybody expected. Dodgers did take 2 of 3, but every single game ended in late-inning heroics. We saw bench-clearing brawls. We saw Mookie Betts diving for a catch to save a game. We saw home runs being hit. It was awesome. I mean, it was literally awesome to watch. And I think that this is going to be a rivalry that really, I think, takes baseball up a notch a little bit, right? I think that the Yankees and the Red Sox in the earlier 2000s, that was kind of the peak of rivalries in baseball. I think that it was, and again, it's a long-standing rivalry. I mean, it's a rivalry that will never go away. Very similar to, like, in the NBA, you've got the Celtics and the Lakers, but let's face it, the last 10 years, the Yankees and Red Sox have not been much of a rivalry. There haven't been really any sort of trading blows or going back and forth. There's no big-time players that have kind of gone neck and neck with each other. You don't have Big Papi and Alex Rodriguez or whatever it might be. It's not the same anymore. And I think that Red Sox and Yankees fans alike can all agree on that. It is not the same rivalry. But the Padres and Dodgers, all of a sudden, you've got a really good rivalry brewing up. And I don't know if that all of the hype and all of the build-up around it kind of spilled over into the game, and that resulted in bench-clearing brawls and this, that, and the third. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that's the case at all. But I do think what this could do for baseball, I'll put it to you this way. If this rivalry gets to the point where where the Yankees and the Red Sox were at one point, I could see potentially this allowing baseball to maybe elevate itself in terms of getting more views, getting more fans, getting more engagement with other people that want to watch the game and sports lovers, because I think that people are kind of looking for that right now. If you look across all sports, there's not really this crazy kind of demand of rivalry, like, at least for when I was growing up, I felt very, very relevant. I mean, very, very relevant. And now, not so much. You don't really have that, and you don't really, I think, get to see that as much. And I think a sport like baseball, having a rivalry like that is going to increase viewership by a million. And so I do think that this could be a really, really huge matchup that could wind up becoming a groundbreaking rivalry. And we've already seen a lot of people in the media discuss it and say, hey, yeah, this is going to be the next big thing. You know, you've got kind of these certain headlines. I mean, let's face it, you could literally have a player matchup for each team for a million different matchups, right? You could have Tatis against Bellinger, or you could have, you know, Machado and Betts, and you could have Darvish versus Kershaw and Snell versus Price, and the list goes on and on and on. And I think that's what's so cool about it, is that there's so many different players that are main big-time name players, major headlining players that are on this team that have an impact. And before this offseason, I don't think that there was any competition in the NL West. I thought that the Dodgers had it completely in the bag, and there was nobody that was going to make any sort of run at the division, and nobody was going to challenge them at all. And now the Padres, they go out and they make some huge moves. They go out and get some really good players. Not to mention, they've had some, I think, very surprising performances for some players like Joe Musgrove getting the first ever Padres no-hitter. But I personally think that he's been kind of on the cusp of having a big blow-up season. I really do. I think that it's been a long time coming for him. I think that he's been he's been at least itching or wanting to get into that kind of that feel, if you will, and whatnot. So I definitely think that this is going to be a really good rivalry for the next couple years. Now, how long will it go? I don't know. That's the other question, right? And you kind of could see, the Yankees and Red Sox, that's kind of been a thing that's gone up and down, up and down, up and down for decades. I mean, decades. And I think, you look at the contracts for these teams and what kind of players that they'll have for the duration of this time and whatnot. I mean, Machado's on a 10-year deal, right? Tatis is on a 14-year deal. The Dodgers have signed everybody and their mother onto the team for an X amount of years. So I think this is going to be something that sticks around for a couple seasons. And I think that we're going to definitely, again, have more opportunities to see more matchups. And quite frankly, I think what would be the solidifying factor on this rivalry would be an NLCS matchup. I mean, that's exactly what we're looking for. We are an NLCS matchup, Game 7 away from having a literal Yankees-Red Sox rivalry in the West. And if you were to have asked me, 5 years ago and said, okay, who do you think would be the most likely in the NL to have a major rivalry? I would have never picked the Dodgers and the Padres. I would have never even thought about them, ever. Wouldn't even come across my mind. But now with the team that they have and now with the additions that they've made, it's a completely different conversation. And prior to this, the NL, I mean, if you look at the NL and the landscape of it, there weren't really any big-time rivalries. I mean, I always like to make the argument, and I don't know how strong of an argument it is, but I like to make the argument of the Braves and the Nationals. For a little period of time, you kind of had this back and forth with them fighting for first place in the NL East. It was not a big rivalry. It was not a big deal. It wasn't necessarily kind of this blockbuster rivalry that you had to pay tickets for and whatnot. It was just kind of, I think, a within a division rivalry, right? And it was not something that was in baseball, because this is a baseball rivalry. This isn't just an NL West rivalry. This is a baseball rivalry, and I think that's what makes it so cool and so interesting, is that it really covers the entire sport, and it's not just within the division. And kind of thinking of some other teams, in all honesty, I mean, you could maybe say the Cubs and the Cardinals, but I feel like that's kind of just been a unspoken rivalry for decades, just because they've been in the same exact division for so many years, and not to mention they're not that far away from each other in distance. So you can see why, and even with, the Brewers and the Cubs or the Brewers and the Cardinals, but again, those are kind of within the division rivalries. Those are not necessarily encompassing all of baseball. And I think that's the difference between these two kind of teams here, is that this rivalry is much more in favor of all of baseball, and it's something that everybody in baseball is getting behind, as opposed to people in the division saying, ooh, this is going to be a good rivalry or a good matchup because the Braves and the Nationals are fighting for first place and whatnot. Now, in terms of what the rest of this season is going to look like, they have got, if I'm not mistaken, 16 more games against each other. So we've got a lot of series to watch. And I know, again, as of recording this right now, on April 22nd, there's going to be another 3-game series with the Padres and the Dodgers. And I think that, this is going to be on ESPN constantly. I really do believe that. And again, it's going to generate more revenue. It's going to generate more views. It's going to generate more people watching the sport of baseball, because they're going to want to watch this rivalry happen. And not to mention, you throw in the other stuff, right? You've got Fernando Tatis, who plays with a lot of flair, with a lot of flash, with a lot of excitement, and he kind of brings his own kind of spin on this rivalry. Then you've got guys on the Dodgers like Clayton Kershaw, who's been there forever, Cody Bellinger, who's kind of this incredible player that's been good from the jump. You've got Mookie Betts being a former MVP and a standout, and you've got a Dodgers team that's got 3 guys on their rotation and their pitching staff that have, each have at least 1 Cy Young. So you don't really have that very often. You really don't. And I think that's why this is such a special rivalry, is because there are pieces to it that other rivalries don't have. Let's look at kind of the Yankees and the Red Sox, and we'll kind of compare and contrast a little bit. Right now, the Red Sox and the Yankees, they haven't really played any pivotal games with each other lately. I will say, though, a couple years ago, the Yankees and the Red Sox did square off in the playoffs. I went to actually a Red Sox-Yankees game. I went to a Red Sox-Yankees playoff game in Fenway Park with some friends of mine. And it was fine. Again, no matter what, if you get to go to a Yankees-Red Sox game in the playoffs, it's one of the most storied rivalries in all of baseball. It is a really, 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 really big deal. Actually, it was on my bucket list of games to go to, and I got to go to it. So that was kind of cool. I got to check that off. But it wasn't necessarily, fans are getting into it, the players are getting into it. There's scuffles on the field or whatever. There was none of that. It was not the same rivalry. And I remember sitting there saying, this isn't the same rivalry that I grew up on, right? Where you had David Ortiz winning games for the Red Sox over the Yankees and this, that, and the third. So you don't have that anymore. You don't get that from the Red Sox and the Yankees. Now with the Padres and the Dodgers, if they're able to get full fans in the stands this year at any certain point, it's going to be a madhouse. It's going to be a sellout crowd, and that the Padres are going to travel well within that state because they're all in the same state. It's all in California, so it's going to be a little in-state rivalry mixed with an NL West rivalry, mixed with just a general rivalry overall. And I think that when you've got players that are polarizing like Tatis, like Betts, like Kershaw, like Machado, it adds to it so much more. And I really hope that this lasts for a couple years. I really hope that this isn't just kind of a little blip on the radar screen and it goes back down. I want this to be something that is going to continue on for the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to be a strong rivalry, and it's going to be a rivalry where people are going to say, hey, I can't wait to catch the Padres-Dodgers game. You guys want to watch the Padres-Dodgers game? That's a big thing. Again, I keep going back to this, but baseball has lost viewership over the past few years. Baseball is down in viewership, and I think that they're looking for something, and that's why they've probably been pressing to have all these rule changes, because they're thinking, okay, game will be a little bit more exciting, people will be more engaged, they won't get to see more action. I think that they've been secretly waiting for this rivalry, or like at least some rivalry to come about in order to really, ramp back up people wanting to watch baseball and people being interested in it. And I think that the Padres and the Dodgers, they're going to be a fun battle to go to check out. I am very excited for it. I really am. And I hope that we do get an NLCS rivalry in the NLCS this year. We got to see them play each other in the playoffs last year. And it was not very exciting, obviously, because there was no fans. Now you have fans in the stands. Now things get really interesting. And I think people don't also realize having fans there, that's part of the rivalry, right? You get to have the fans that kind of get into it with each other, whatnot. Obviously, you don't want anybody to get hurt and whatnot, but there are those kind of jawing back and forth comments and whatnot, and then it kind of, again, spills over into the field, and now you've got yourself an absolute battle. And it's really cool to watch. And, rivalries in general in sports are a very important thing. I think it kind of allows the sport to have an identity because, again, when you have a rivalry in a sport, people will immediately associate that sport with those teams, and then it'll stick in their head, right? You've got the Lakers and the Celtics for NBA, and that's kind of like, okay, those are the first two teams people think of. Same thing with baseball. When you ask a person that does not know much about baseball, one of the first teams that they will just blurt out in general, I personally think, at least maybe 65-70% of the time, will be the Yankees and the Red Sox. I genuinely believe that. And I'm personally a really big fan of having rivalries in sports in general. And I know people probably think, well, how can you have a rivalry in baseball? You can have a rivalry in baseball. It's very possible. It's not necessarily out of the question at all. You can literally have, and again, it's a little bit different because it's not necessarily contact like there is with basketball and with football. And so, there's already going to be tempers flaring. There's already going to be a lot of competition and adrenaline pumping. And all of a sudden now you've got, guys going at it, after the play and whatnot and really kind of, making it into the rivalry that it is. I hate to say that, but rivalries are made off of those extra things, those little scrums that get on, that kind of happen on the field, bench clearing brawls, bat flip home runs to win games, sliding catches for, to save a game. We have literally gotten to see, I think, a little preview into what the next 5 years will be. And when you already get to see this taste of it I get to see Mookie Betts sliding and grabbing a ball and saving it. That's really cool. That is really cool to see. And so that makes me excited as a fan. I have very high hopes for that. I think that all of the players on both teams are evenly stacked teams, right? I think the Padres and the Dodgers can go toe-to-toe with pitching. I think they can go toe-to-toe with hitting. I think that the Padres are one of the few teams in the MLB that can go neck and neck with the Dodgers the entire way. I really do believe that. So we'll have to see how the rest of the season goes and kind of how these other 16 matchups unfold and really what the next couple of years will be like. I think that if we get an NLCS matchup between these two teams, I mean, it's signed, sealed, and delivered as a rivalry. There's no question about it. It's already been stamped. Now you just need to have it signed, sealed, and delivered. But I think it's on its way out of the mail. But nonetheless, really excited to see these two teams battle it out the rest of this season and for years coming up. But, folks, that's going to do it for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I'll share whether or not the Cubs should go ahead and start to rebuild or if they should give it at least one more go and try to keep going with the group that they have now. It's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today, Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I got into discussing this Padres-Dodgers rivalry that's budding and discussing the ins and outs to it. But I want to now get into whether or not the Cubs could keep going or should keep going with the group that they have now, or if they should try and start to rebuild and start things over and start from scratch, really. It's a very interesting situation that they have. It's very interesting. It's actually one of the more, I would say, unique situations in baseball, mainly because of, again, the contracts that are coming up, the players that they have on those contracts coming up, and kind of where they're at right now in their organization's history. They're coming on, or at least they're a couple years removed from being a World Series championship team, winning in 2016, and then you lose Theo Epstein, kind of the guy that really built this team and put this winning championship team together. And now you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, where do we go from here? Right? Do we keep going with this group? Or do we kind of go back to the drawing board, get rid of everybody before it's too late, and try and get some pieces for this player, try and get some pieces for this player, and build for the future? Because Anthony Rizzo is going to be a free agent after this season. Same thing with Chris Bryant, same thing with Javi Baez, and same thing with Zach Davies. All will be free agents after this year. So that's four main players, if you ask me, three of them being part of that 2016 World Series team. So they have some decisions to make. They have some very, I think, challenging decisions to make ahead of them. And not to mention, Contreras will be a free agent in 2023. Jock Peterson will also be a free agent in 2023. So that's, 6 guys right there. And if you're fielding a team of 9, well, that's about 2/3 of your team right there that is going to be up for free agency or arbitration, one of the two. And it kind of makes you wonder, okay, what do we do from here? And Chris Bryant, I'll start with each player. Chris Bryant has had his name floating around every sort of trade rumor that there possibly is in baseball. I mean, he's literally been in every single trade rumor. And I think for good reason, because they need to figure out, okay, he's a former MVP. He's somebody that's got a lot of potential. He's already shown that he's got a lot of potential. He's got a ton of talent. I mean, a guy that hits 39 bombs in a year, that's no average Joe. That's no average Joe, and he wins an MVP as well. So they've got that going for them. So they can really get rid of him before they have to let him go in free agency, and they get absolutely, jack squat for him. They need to go out, and I think, personally, I would trade Chris Bryant. I think that they might have waited too long. I don't know why they waited this long to do it. I think last year they should have traded him and gotten him off the payroll and gotten rid of him sooner rather than later. I would also have to say that, Anthony Rizzo, another guy that's kind of struggled the last few years, I feel like they should get rid of him because if he keeps struggling, that's going to just mean it's going to be a bad disaster for the Cubs, because they won't be able to get anything in return for him because of the poor performance that he's been putting on. And then Javi Baez, I mean, he's coming off one of his worst seasons, if not his worst season in his career last year. And Zach Davies coming from the Padres, we're only going to get him for a year, and then he was probably going to leave. But those three other players, they're important pieces. I mean, they're each guys that can hit 25 to 30-plus homers and over 80 RBIs consistently. Jock Peterson, after having an incredible spring training, seems to have forgotten how to hit a baseball. So maybe losing him won't be that big of a deal. But Wilson Contreras, another guy, I mean, he's got one of the highest WARs out of catchers since 2016. He's got one of the highest OPSs amongst catchers since 2016 as well. So he's somebody that is going to be a big impact guy as well. I think that it makes more sense for this team to get rid of everybody. I don't think they should bring anybody back. I don't think that they should re-sign anyone. I think that they should just start from scratch. At this point, I feel like they're kind of in a rut, and you can tell. I mean, this was a Cubs team that was feared in 2015, 2016. They were absolutely feared. Now, not so much. I don't really bat an eye when I see the Cubs are playing the Brewers. I'm like, okay, well, it's the Cubs. Whatever. We'll see what happens. They're not the same team. They don't demand the same, I think, respect that they once did because of the losses that they've had, because of the players that are not there, or at least the players that are not performing well, the losses that they have had with some of the players that they've had over the years. And I think that now it's kind of a starting of a new chapter in their history. I think that they need to maybe go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. They don't have Theo Epstein there to build them this incredible winning team. They don't have him there. So now they have to, again, go back, figure out what they need to do. But time's ticking, and that's the problem, is I think they're running out of time. And I think come June, it's going to be a big, I think, evaluation time, or at least reevaluating, if you will. They're going to have to really take a step back and say, okay, what do we do now? We are, at this point of the season, we're a contending team. Do we keep moving forward? And then all of a sudden something fizzles out and we don't have enough leverage to make a trade, and then we wind up losing these guys in free agency? If we're not contending, do we just get rid of everyone before the trade deadline? Personally, I think you have to give it till June. I think April, you can't really gauge it on much because it's the first month of the season. May, same kind of thing. It's the second month of the season. Guys are still kind of getting their feet wet. But come June, come All-Star break, that's when you need to make a decision and say, okay, where are we at right now in the season? Do we have the leverage to get rid of these guys, and they're playing well? That's the other thing. The Cubs have to hope that some of these guys play well and that they put on really good performances, because if not, that's going to be a hard sell for this Cubs team to try and unload some guys for some, and they're probably going to just get prospects, I would imagine at least. And I remember last year, Chris Bryant, actually, they were about to deal him to the Red Sox, and then something went down. They didn't do that. It fell through. And to the life of me, I will always kind of wonder why they didn't do that. Why? And I don't know if they felt that they could make a huge run for the World Series last year. I did not see it at all. I did not see them making anything close to a World Series run. I mean, they lost in the first round to the Marlins. And again, that's kind of where they're at right now. Ever since winning the World Series, their best finish since 2016 was in 2017. They went to the NLCS, but after that, they've only been in the playoffs twice, and they haven't gotten out of the wild card round either time. So since 2018, they're 0-2, 0-3 on getting into the NLDS. So this is, again, a very different team. This is not the same Cubs team of the early to mid-2010s at all. And same thing with Baez. I mean, Baez is going to be part of this huge shortstop class. And if he's wise, I would say I don't want to re-sign with the Cubs because I could probably get more money somewhere else, A, and B, I'll be on a championship contending team. And I don't know if it's the writing on the wall that these guys are seeing or whatever it might be. I don't really, understand why some of these guys are not, performing the way they should be. I mean, it's kind of puzzling to me as to why they're not performing at a high level because they are really good players. And Rizzo out of those three, I think, is probably the worst one. And again, that's not saying much because he's a really good baseball player nonetheless. But having him also struggle, that's going to be a really hard sell. Zach Davies, though, I don't think that they're going to be able to trade him. I think that they're going to have to hold on to him. They'll probably wind up losing him in free agency. And it's unfortunate because they could probably get something decent for him. I mean, he's not a bad pitcher. He's been good the last 2 or 3 years. He was good for the Padres last year. And I think he would fit very well on a lot of teams' rotations if he was on the right team. But I just don't think, and again, I feel like if they got rid of him, it would be the end of their pitching. Their pitching is not that good. And again, if they got rid of a lot of these guys, it would just mean, okay, we're kind of giving in, we're giving up. But they have to make a decision. And that's the thing, is they can't allow things to kind of just, let the clock tick on the wall. They can't allow that to happen because they've got some serious decisions to make. And I think that if they don't make them quick enough, they're going to be really, really behind the eight ball. And I'll put it to you this way. If they don't do anything sooner rather than later, and if they don't go after anybody, that's at least of some prominence or at least get some decent prospects, they're going to lose everybody in free agency. Maybe they re-sign somebody. I mean, maybe. That would be a big stretch. I don't see Chris Bryant coming back. Chris Bryant will not be a Cub after this year. No way. No shot at all. Javi Baez, probably not. I could see Rizzo sticking around. If he doesn't have any other offers that he likes. Contreras, though, is going to be an interesting case because he could be wanted on a lot of teams. He could probably demand the highest value, if you will, out of these guys because, again, there's far and few between of Wilson Contrerases in the league because he's a good, solid defensive catcher and he's a really good hitting catcher. So that comes very infrequently, so that's why I think that he's going to have a lot of popularity among some teams in the league that are looking for that really good offensive, really good defensive catcher that can make a huge impact immediately. I just don't know if... I don't know. It's a really weird situation that they're in right now, and it's kind of sad to see where the Cubs have gone and how they are right now because, before 2015, they were not very good. For a long time, they were not very good. Then you saw a rapid ascension to the top. They are back on top. They win a World Series, and then they kind of step down just one step on the staircase, and then all of a sudden, the next year, they just kind of take a huge tumble down the staircase. And again, a team that went from winning the World Series in 2016 to now they can't even get out of the wild card, that means something. That means something is up, something's going on, and Baez is the one that is the biggest head scratcher because I think that he could be the best player out of all of these guys, and I think he's got some of the most potential. And not to mention, first couple years, he was playing great. He was playing incredible baseball. Last year did not play very well, and I don't know if things are going on internally with them. I don't know if there's something going on with management and with ownership and whatnot with the Cubs because it does seem a little weird that it's almost just at a drop of the hat, they're just not the same team anymore. And you would think that if you kept the same personnel year after year, they would still be really good. They would still be at the top of the game. But, they're sitting towards the bottom of the NL Central now. And I know it's early, so you can't really say much about that. But they didn't really put on a really good showing last year. And I just don't understand what the point is of this Cubs team keeping around these players if they're not going to perform. That's the other thing. Imagine if they keep a couple of these guys and they fork over millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to them, and they don't do anything. They are terrible. They are bad. They are really, really, really bad. That's not going to work well. That's not going to work well at all. They're going to be scratching their heads, wondering what happened, what went wrong, where it went wrong, and they're going to be paying guys more money than they should to be performing way, way less than they should. And that's what's kind of frightening, and that's what's kind of worrisome to me, is that the Cubs kind of get suckered in. They're saying, okay, you know what, let's try and make a last-ditch effort. Let's try and go all in for it. Why not? Why not? Whatever. It is what it is. We'll see what happens. I just think that they could wind up losing money and they could wind up really in a hole, and I think that could really hinder them. I really do. And this NL Central division is not, I don't think, hard to get through. I think the Brewers are having a really good season. The Cardinals could potentially be another team. And the Reds, I think, are very surprising right now. I don't know how long that will last, but it could be very interesting to see nonetheless. So my point being is this, and I'll kind of close it out a little bit here with this. If the Cubs are within, I would say, third place or better in the division by middle of June, end of June, they would have to really reevaluate and really sit down and say, okay, are we going all in or are we not? And if they go all in, I personally would get rid of some other guys and try and bring in some other pieces. Try and refreshen the team a little bit. I think that's what's the problem. It's stale. It's been the same guys, and I think everybody's figured them out. That's literally what I think it is. People have just figured out the Cubs, and they cannot adjust. They can't make any sort of adjustment. So all in all, I definitely think that if they can get to a point at this season where they're within striking distance of first place or whatever it might be, and they can try and make a serious run, then they should probably go all in and try and make a last-ditch effort. Now, after that, though, if things kind of fall out and fizzle out and they go into free agency, then they're going to have another issue on their hands. Are they going to be able to convince guys to stick around if they don't make a championship run and they don't make, a major push towards the World Series? I think guys like Baez and guys like Bryant would leave. I really do. I think Bryant has been looking for a way out for a long time. And I think Baez is also kind of just biding his time because both of them know that in this free agency this upcoming season, they're going to be getting a lot of money wherever they go. I mean, one of them is a former MVP, and the other one's one of the best shortstops in baseball. So they're going to get paid a lot of money. So there's a lot of incentives and a lot of kind of pieces in this entire puzzle because we don't really know what's going to happen. We have zero idea what's going to happen by June, and so do the Cubs, and I think that's what's the unsettling thing is they do not know which direction to go in, how to go about it, because if they are contending at the certain point and they go all in and then it fizzles out for them, then they could lose everybody or they could maybe re-sign one guy that they don't actually want. If they're not at contention point in middle of June, then maybe they need to get rid of guys and just start from square one. I think that's their safest bet. If I'm the Cubs, I just reevaluate by mid-June and say, okay, where are we at? If we're not where we're supposed to be, then you know what? It is what it is. We've had a nice run. We'll get rid of some of these guys. Maybe we'll try and re-sign them. But let's get rid of them and try and get something for them before we let them walk and we get absolutely nothing and we're stuck with literally our hands in our pockets trying to figure out what happened. So all in all, got to give it till June, got to give it till July to figure something out, and whatever decision they make, they've got to go all in on it. They really do, because if they don't, it's again going to be kind of, I think, a very big time let down and disappointment of a season, and really kind of management decision as well if they can't figure out what's the right move. I think that they should just rebuild. That's my guess, and that's my hope for them, because if not, I think that they'll be really, really regretful that they were, and really regret that they were not able to make a wiser decision beforehand, and it'll be a point where it's too late. So that, folks, is going to do it for us in our third segment. As always, really appreciate you all sticking around, but stay right there. Don't go anywhere, because after this commercial break, for the final segment today, I will be getting into which teams that are struggling right now that will be able to turn things around later on in this season. Folks, do not go anywhere, because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I got into what the Cubs should do after this year with many of their star players up for free agency and arbitration over the next year or two. But I want to wrap up the show with a discussion on which teams that have been struggling so far this season that will be able to turn things around very soon, or at some point. So getting into it and kind of running through a couple of the teams that have struggled. Cardinals right now under 500. Braves the same thing. Yankees have been really bad, and so have the Twins. The Astros have been struggling, and the Blue Jays have been struggling. Now, there have been some teams that have figured it out, and they've been able to turn around a very slow start into a pretty good pick-me-up, if you will, in this latter part of this first month of the season. So starting with the Cardinals, they're sitting at 8-10 right now. Quite frankly, I think they'll be just fine. I really do. I think that, and I know I've been critical of them because I don't think that they really have that much depth. I don't think that they're a team that go really deep. I think that they're a very good, as I like to call them, surface teams, right? A surface team. I'll kind of define that because I just came up with the term. Basically a team that on the outside, they've got 2 or 3 star-studded players and everybody is kind of oohing and awing at. But then after that, there's not much else to them. And that's, I think, what they have right now. Goldschmidt, Arenado, they're kind of the 2 main headlining acts. Jack Flaherty is going to be a really good pitcher, though. I mean, he's already shown that he's a good pitcher, but as of right now, it's kind of the Arenado-Goldschmidt show. I think they'll be able to turn around because of this. Their division is really not that hard. I think that the Brewers are going to give them a fight, and I think the Reds will too. The Cubs, I don't think that they will, and and the Pirates are definitely not going to. I mean, the Pirates are 8-10 right now, and there is absolutely zero chance that they are able to finish a season 2 games under 500. There's no way. Again, it's a whole... To think about how much we still have in this season, it's kind of unfathomable this year, because we're coming out of a year where, at this point, 15, 16, probably even close to 20 games into the year, we're already starting to talk about the playoffs, right? I mean, we're not even close to that. We're not even close to September. We're not even close to July or June. We're still here in the end of April. So I think there's a lot of time for all these teams to figure it out. St. Louis has just made so many huge, big-time ads over the offseason that I think it'll be hard for them to be really bad. It would be kind of embarrassing, and it would also, I think, and I hate to say this because he's a very good player, it would speak, I think, volume to Arenado. I think it'll speak volume to who Arenado is, and I don't know if he isn't great in the clubhouse or whatever. I mean, he kind of had a tough time in Colorado, and I'm sure that a lot of it had to do with the team. But if they're not going to be good this year, again, we might have to start looking at Arenado like, well, what's the deal? You go from place to place, and you're supposed to kind of upgrade it, but you're actually downgrading it. But again, I don't think that's going to happen because he's just too good of a player. Same thing with Goldschmidt. They'll be fine. They're 8-10 right now, but they will very, very soon turn things around, I think, quicker than a lot of us think. And honestly, an 8-10 start to the season is not that bad. I mean, it's 2 games under 500 with, about, let's say, just the first 20 games in. That's not awful. And you also have to remember they're coming off a year where they played only 60 games. The Cardinals had a pretty long offseason. They just got back into the rhythm of things, getting into spring training. So there's a lot of factors that we have to look at and take into account as to whether or not, it's something to be worrisome about and to kind of concern ourselves with, or if it's just kind of a little bit of a hiccup or a slow start, if you will, and they're just trying to get back to, normal times, if you will, playing in April, playing in May, playing in June, not waiting around until the end of July, and it's like, oh my God, now the season has started. It's a little bit different. So I definitely think the Cardinals will turn things around. Now the Braves, I have a lot of hope for the Braves. I think the Braves are going to be really good this year. I know that they're 8-10 right now, and I know they're going to be in a really, really tough division, so the Cardinals do kind of have that one-up over the Braves in terms of their competition won't be as stiff. The Braves, though, let's not forget, folks, this is still a really good team. This is still a team that has a ton of talent, a lot of guys that have a lot of ability, and it should not shock anybody if the Braves wind up winning the division. I know I predicted that the Mets will win, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Braves did either, because they're a very well-ran team. They've got a ton of talent on their team. Ronald Acuna Jr. is one of the hottest hitting baseball players right now in the MLB. I mean, he's been off to an absolute tear and a half, and it's kind of insane to see how well he's been playing, and not to mention the impact that he's got on this team. I mean, it's going to be a very fun season in Atlanta, and I know that, again, they're off to a slow start, but we also have to factor in a couple other things. There's also the issue of COVID, right? How does that impact teams? How does that impact players? Guys are going to be playing 2 or 3 days, and then they're going to be off for 3 days because somebody gets COVID, or so on and so forth. I mean, right now, Acuna's leading the entire MLB in batting average at .419 and home runs with 7. I mean, the guy has been absolutely on a tear lately. So, and not to mention, he leads them in also slugging percentage at .887, and then OPS with a 1.373 OPS. So, again, you do the math. You figure it out. That guy is going to be a really good baseball player. He's already starting to show it. So I do believe that the Braves are going to pick things up, turn things around, because this is just too good of a team. They made some solid ads. They didn't really make a whole bunch of ads. I mean, Charlie Morton was a big pickup, and then re-signing Ozuna, that was another really good move on their part. So I think all in all, it's going to be a really, really good year in Atlanta. I actually think that they have a better shot at being really good than the Cardinals do, because I just think that they're a better team overall. Now, the Yankees and the Twins, they're both in the same boat, 6-11. I have faith for the Yankees because it's the Yankees, and they will always be the Yankees, and they will always be in the conversation. They will always be a contender. They will always be a team that's going to have at least some sort of shot at making to the World Series because it's the New York Yankees. The Twins, on the other hand, especially after what I saw yesterday, I mean, I literally watched the replay because I was reading an article about it, and I wanted to see what this wild ending was with the A's and the Twins. It was alarming to see just the nonchalantness of, if that's even a word, of the Twins, and especially their infield. I mean, it was a slow grounder to second base. He didn't even have to make that far of a throw. Guy bobbles it. And then Luis Arias, who's one of their best players, one of their top up-and-coming guys over at third base, I mean, it's a casual throw, and you could see he was coming up right when he was coming out of his stance. He didn't stay low. He didn't follow through. He didn't carry his momentum towards the bag. He stood up, and it sailed, obviously, over the first baseman's head. And it's little things like that. I think that's the problem with the Twins. They're a team that I think try to get by on talent too much. And they don't try to polish those little things. They don't try to clean up the little errors, the little things that they're not doing, those little freebies they might give up, whatever it might be. They're not singling those out and working on them. They are continuing to struggle in one way or another with things. And a 6-11 start to a team that a lot of people, and again, I was reading a lot of things that experts and journalists and people on MLB.com were saying that the Twins are going to run away with this division. They're going to win it. They didn't care about what the White Sox did in the offseason. And lo and behold, it's actually the Royals that have come up through the ranks, and they've been able to take over as the first-place team in the AL Central. So I am very worried about the Twins. I am very concerned about them because they're – and at the same time, though, I have to remind myself of this. This Twins team is usually really good to start, and then they kind of fizzle out and plateau, and then they kind of dip down in the playoffs, and then they get sent home early. So maybe this is secretly, and again, maybe and secretly, a good thing for them. It will be a good thing for them to kind of work through this tough patch right now early on in the season, so they're not worrying about it in August when time is ticking and all of a sudden it's going to be playoffs and they're not playing their best baseball. Maybe they're getting away, or maybe they're getting out of the way the really tough, the struggling baseball that they are playing right now. And they're getting it out of the way. They're getting it out of their system. They're not worrying about it. So then later on in the year, they can be at their best. And they're a good team. That's the thing. They're a very good team. I mean, if you look at this team, I think that they've got a lot more depth than the Cardinals do. I believe that genuinely. I really do believe that. And I think that the Twins right now, they're just mightily struggling. But the Yankees, they'll figure it out. They've got some injuries. Having Luke Voit sidelined is not a good sign. That's not a good thing. He won't be out for the whole year. But having him as, again, somebody that led the MLB in home runs last year, he was one of the only, he might have been the only player, if I'm not mistaken, that had over 20 home runs during the season. So missing that out of your lineup, it's a big hole. It's a big void that you've got to fill. And guys like Judge have not been hitting well. I mean, Aaron Judge has not hit well at all. Same thing with Stanton. I mean, there's guys that are struggling. And again, back to the other point, it's also about the spring training. They're now playing baseball in April, which they have not had any sort of accustomed to doing since 2019. So about 2 years from now, or 2 years ago, that was the last time that they actually played baseball in April. So teams are still trying to figure it out. I think they're still getting their feet wet. They're still getting back into a rhythm of things. And I think once we get into May and June and July, that will be a better gauge as to whether or not these teams are going to really continue to struggle or they're going to pull themselves out of this hole that they've dug for themselves. But then I want to get into the Astros because I know I was very critical of the Astros in the offseason. They have somewhat, I would say, surprised me, I guess, in terms of they've actually had guys playing better than I expected because of just last year. I mean, there was guys everywhere that were, they couldn't even hit the ball if it was just sitting on a tee. I mean, serious. It was really kind of sad to see. Now, the playoffs, they kind of picked it up, and I guess they've carried that over into this year. But this is an AL West division that I think is going to be a lot tougher than they're used to. And I think that's what's kind of happening right now is that the Astros have kind of been taking a hit, or they've kind of been given a blow, and they're kind of like, whoa, hello. This division all of a sudden has got really good teams. The Mariners are in first place. The Angels are right there, neck and neck. The A's are right there, neck and neck. All of these teams are really good, and the Rangers are only a game back of 500. So there's a lot of teams that actually could give a lot of competition to the Astros, but I think that they can pick it up. I definitely do because, again, I think that very similar to the Cubs, they're in a situation where this is a last-ditch effort. And I think that they need to go all in this year, and this needs to be the season that they try to go the whole way again. And again, this is another thing. They need to prove people wrong if they want to really let people know and say, hey, we can win, cheating or not. Doesn't matter. We will win. We are just a winning team. We know how to win. And so I think that would be a huge statement sent to everybody in baseball and really everybody all around the world that this team, doesn't matter how they do it, they're going to get it done. But I have faith that they can turn things around. And back to the Twins, I do have faith that they'll turn things around. I definitely do. The Cardinals, Braves, Yankees, I have a ton of faith that they will. But the Twins, I think that they'll be able to pick it up sooner rather than later. Same thing with the Astros. I think that they will actually turn out to be second-half teams, if you will. And that's why I do wonder about some of these teams that are off to really good starts, if that's actually going to be something that comes back to bite them later on in the year. If they are actually getting fatigued and they're getting tired and they're getting exhausted earlier on in the season than they normally are, then that could actually come back to hurt some teams. And then finally, the Blue Jays, they're 8-10. Again, I'm not worried about them. I'm not worried about the Blue Jays at all. I was actually skimming through an article today on The Athletic about could the Blue Jays be baseball's next major behemoth in terms of, you know, the team that they build, the amount of money that they can bring in, the personnel that they have on the field, so on and so forth. I could see it. I mean, I think that they're well on their way. They've got a great core group of young players on their team that have been playing very well, and they've shown that they can play at a high level. And then you throw in guys like Springer, who's a seasoned veteran who brings a lot of experience. I just worry about the pitching. That's, I think, the only thing that I'm genuinely concerned about is that rotation, is that starting pitching. What will that do, and how will that hold up once, Hyun Jin Ryu is not pitching, right? I mean, like Eduardo Perez said on that one broadcast, what are they going to do from when it's Ryu to Ryu? How are they going to hold themselves up above water? And I think that's a big thing. I would love to see a stat on games that he starts versus games that he doesn't start and see what their record is, because it would probably be something that's very interesting to look at because, and again, it's early, so it's a small sample size. But nonetheless, I mean, it's kind of still, they need to take that into consideration. They need to look at their rotation a little bit and say, okay, we've got all the hitting in the world, but we don't have any pitching to back it up. So it's just going to become a slugfest between us and another team. And I think that is something that I don't think they're at that point yet where they can go toe-to-toe with a big offensive team and let the pitching kind of fall apart. They're not at that point yet. The young players they have, they're not at that point yet. I really do not see that. But again, it's early. There's a lot of time to have, things figured out and get back into the rhythm of things. And like I keep mentioning, this is not a normal thing for these guys right now because they're coming off a season where they were playing in late July, not in the beginning of April. So that's a big adjustment for them, having to revert back to how things were before the pandemic. But giving some examples of teams that have been able to quickly turn around. I mean, the Red Sox, a perfect example, at one point or another, if I'm not mistaken, they were 3-9. And all of a sudden, now they're 12-7 or 13-7. And then you look at the Athletics, they're the same record, right? Just about 12-7, 11-7, somewhere around there. And so they can, and after the Athletics had started the year 0-6, they were actually 1-7 through 8. So that should also tell you a whole lot of things about where the A's are as a team. So the teams can figure it out. And the difference with some of these teams is that it's just the talent and how much talent that they have to go to, right? The Yankees have a ton of talent to go to. The Braves have a ton of talent to go to. The Astros, the Blue Jays. The Twins do, but it kind of falls off at a certain point. And then the Cardinals, it really dips down after a certain point. So I would say that I'm least worried probably about the Yankees or the Braves because those are actually really good, legitimate teams. I would say I'm next not as worried or not so worried about the Cardinals and probably the Blue Jays, and then I'm probably the most worried about the Twins and the Astros. If I had to pick, I would definitely say the Twins and the Astros, and I'm probably most worried about the Twins just because I want to see them win a playoff series. I want to see them get out of that just funk that they've been in for 20-some years, and they just can't win a playoff series, and it's still just that thing that they're chasing after. And after seeing what they did against the Athletics, it's things like that that start to pile up that you can't allow to pile up. And so I think eventually as the season goes on, they'll work themselves out of those mistakes, out of those little kinks that they're in right now, those little hiccups, and they'll be back to their normal selves sooner rather than later. But we've already seen that teams can turn it around quickly. I mean, we've already seen that it can happen at a drop of the hat, and I think that some of these teams that are struggling right now, they'll be able to pick it back up sooner rather than later. So, folks, that is going to do it for us today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. As always, it's a joy chatting baseball with all of you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask to please remember to subscribe to the show as always, and also write a nice review that really helps us out, continuing to just give us any sort of feedback that you might have about the show, topics that you want to hear about, so on and so forth. We are always open for anything and everything. And also, if you can please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, we would really appreciate that. And as always, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening in, and have a great, great rest of your weekend and week as well.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.